Ah, yes. So thanks for having me. And I brought along a bunch of little AI guys here because that's the topic. So we're going to talk today about how AI ate my website. Now, when you hear that kind of title, right, AI eating a website, you might conjure some scary things, like maybe a giant computer brain here eating up everything on its way to global dominance. My poor little AI guys, but don't worry, we'll bring them back. Okay, now that everybody's awake from all of our little video animations, we can actually get into what are we talking about. So I mentioned this concept of a giant computer brain. I kind of only half jokingly said it because when a lot of people think about AI stuff, there's all this talk about AGI and the computer is going to become smarter than all of us. But let's unpack that for a second. What do we mean by this giant computer brain? Well, what happens is you've got lots of information in many, many places that's been digitized. And a lot of that is in websites like my website. And what happens is all that information basically gets turned into data that machines can learn from. So we call that training data. And effectively, this training data is used to create these very, very large next token prediction machines, is kind of the way of thinking about it. They see all this information and they kind of learn, like, based on what I'm looking at now, what should happen next. And the end result is something pretty magical in a lot of cases. So you mentioned giving you a bio. These days, I don't really give a bio because you can go to Chat GPT or Claude or whatever and be like, who the heck is this Luke guy? And it'll do a pretty good job of answering that question in a lot of rich detail, as you can see here. So when you have a system that can just take an arbitrary question like, who the heck is this Luke guy? And give you like a dossier, there's no wonder people think scary AI thing, right? Like, how the heck does this thing work? Oh my God, it seems to know everything. Is it going to take my job? All those kinds of fun topics. But I think it's actually a lot more useful to really understand like what kind of capabilities does AI give us than it is to think about these kind of negative scenarios. So what I want to talk a little bit about today is how do we make use of all of these capabilities that AI has to re-envision content experiences, to re-envision software experiences, and to kind of create some fun in building with this technology, more so than anything else. So what do we mean when we talk about AI? Well, there's actually all kinds of different AI models out there, and they can be used for lots of different things, not just text generation. Text generation is one of the things you can do with large language models, but you can also take text and turn it into speech. You can have vision models that'll do things like extract objects out of an image or video. They can do things like facial recognition, or you can do translation of text. You can do a bunch of retrieval tasks with AI models. And some models will just do one of these tasks. Other ones become a little bit more general purpose. And I think what's really different in the past, maybe call it 2 to 3 years, than where we were at before with AI, is now you have these bigger general purpose models that can do a lot of these tasks together instead of them just being very specialized to smaller machines. And that opens up a whole bunch of possibility, especially since there are big AI labs not that really make a lot of this very widely distributed and almost free. So you get a lot of these capabilities packaged together in uh, large systems that just about anybody can access. But we can use these AI capabilities either as independent models or ones that do multiple things to rethink what's possible when people interact with stuff. And I'm deliberately saying stuff kind of generically. But for the purpose of this talk, I'm just going to focus that on one thing, which is my little website here. So how do we take all these things that AI can do, either from a language or from a vision perspective, and how do we put it to work on something that we're all pretty familiar with, which is a website? right? For years, the web's been around, and everybody kind of can have a mental model of how a website works and what it does. So my website is not that different from a lot of other websites out there. It is old. I started this website 29 years ago, if that gives you some context. But over those 29 years, I've added something like 2,000 articles to it. There's almost 400 PDF presentations in there. There's close to 2,000 images, over 100 videos. So lots of stuff. All right. And this is common for just about any website that's been around for a while. It's really easy for these things to start acclimating more and more content as they get used. So if you wanted to make your way through all of this content just on my site, running the numbers, God bless you if you want to get through 500,000 written words or 6,000 minutes of video, right? 3,000 minutes of audio. That's a lot of stuff. And to make your way through that, you can really currently, like on the web, do one of two things. You can search, which, as we've seen, is a really powerful thing. See Google, or you can browse, which before Google was Yahoo, right? But those are kind of the two big paradigms of making your way through web content. But again, searching through 500,000 words or browsing through 500,000 words, not the best experience. And why I say that is if you think about what happens in the real world, right? If we were in the same room together and you had a question that you thought maybe I could help you with, you could say, "Hey, Luke, how do I?" And what I would do is I would kind of think about that for a little bit. Be like, what do I know about this topic? I'd probably remember a bunch of stuff, and on the fly, I'd assemble an answer, probably in real time, and just start spewing text out of my mouth, which is actually similar to what some of these AI models start to do, right? But the human brain, I think, still even more so than an AI brain, is a pretty amazing thing. I can take all those experiences and all that information I have and almost instantaneously start assembling it into a relevant response. Well, that's a pretty nice experience, right? Ask me a question, get a relevant answer. And again, if you compare that to our options online, right, your kind of typical, here's your 10 links with little bits of snippets if you search. Or if you're browsing, let's say you get down to the category or tag, depending on what sort of system of classification you have or filter, you're still looking at a bunch of things that you have to wade through, uh, parse, pull out little bits, read some bits, and then assemble an answer on your own, right? So a very different answer mechanism to get an answer than what we have in the real world. But what if instead we could get much closer to the way I would answer your question in real life? And what do I mean by that? It's kind of what I went through is I'd go through all the things I've written or said on this topic. I'd put together a coherent reply. I'd probably cite the sources so you can go deeper or verify what I said. And here's an example of doing that in a product I launched about 2 years ago called Ask Luke. And so if you say, how do I pick metrics for my app? You can see it comes back with a compiled answer, gives you some citations on the right. That first citation looks like it comes from a video presentation, so I can kind of click on that to see, okay, what is this coming from? And you can see it will actually take you to that video without taking you out of this experience, put you at that point in the video where I'm talking about, in this case, if you look at the slide, I don't know how big it shows up on your screen, but I think literally on the slide it says something like, how do I pick metrics for my app? And it's got a bunch of bullet points. And then the transcript down below is attached specifically to that thing. Now, this is kind of what I mean about what happens when a bunch of AI models effectively eat all the pieces of content that make up my website and then spit out a very different interaction model. So if you look at this, right, all of these pieces here, the transcript, the summary, the topics, that answer, all of that stuff is AI generated. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But what people usually ask me when I show them this or they encounter this is like, well, how did you make this? And I'll get into that in a second. But first, I want to talk about what is it? Because it makes more sense to kind of have a framing of what is it before you get into like how does it actually get made. So when you see this sort of ask a question, get a response, a lot of people say, well, isn't this a chat bot, right? And obviously, chat is kind of the term du jour of the user experience world these days as people debate whether or not it's the future or a terrible interface. But what a chat design pattern kind of looks like, it's very familiar to most of us because we probably spend way too much time chatting on our phones. But we can kind of see these questions and answers sort of alternate, right? Like replies left, right. The height depends on the amount of content you have in there. It's a very common kind of UI paradigm. Now, when you just take this paradigm that comes out of messaging apps on our phones and you try to apply them in contexts like the Ask Luke thing, where what we're doing is actually retrieving from a large amount of content, right, from a big corpus, trying to cite the sources, trying to let you actually interact with that stuff. This basic design pattern doesn't really hold up very well. And you see this in usability studies on these kinds of chat interfaces is that when people are actually trying to elicit information from this format, right, they want to pick stuff up that they want to use later, or they want to kind of reassemble it into something, having to go through this big scrolling massive wall of text to find the bits and pieces that are useful to you is kind of a pain in the butt. Right. And so this is a little Nielsen Norman group study that says kind of similar things. And it calls out that this is a big point of friction for people trying to get the info out. So instead of that, and to account for a couple other design things, instead of using this sort of traditional chat thing, we went through a series of explorations on how to design the Ask Luke interface and actually came up with something that looks a little bit more like the pattern you see on the right versus the pattern on the left. And so, what is that? Well, in this implementation, what happens is all the previous questions and answers get collapsed, where we show a little snippet of each. So it makes it a lot easier to scan through previous things and get back to what you're looking at. And then the current one is sort of opened by default. And you can go back to previous ones and open them back up if you're trying to find something from before to make use of. And so here, this is a little desktop view of how things look on a large screen. So you can see that how does free shipping help? That's the current question and answer. It's kind of expanded by default. The other ones are scrunched up, but you can come back to one of them, open it up, and get the question and answer in there as well. And this pattern, I think, actually looks a little bit more like a FAQ kind of design pattern than a chatbot pattern. I bring up design patterns just because many people nowadays, like, this is their go-to mode of thinking about software design, right? Like, which design pattern is this? And I don't think the one on the left is necessarily optimal here, but if you look at the one on the right, the FAQ pattern, it's really similar to what I was showing there, right? There's like a search field and there's a bunch of questions and answers that are kind of collapsed, but you can make your way through to get the information that you want. It's really scannable. Uh, and I like this example because I think it speaks to a broader uh, kind of paradigm or process issue in user experience world, which is if you start from the problem space instead of the solution, right? Instead of saying, oh, I need a chat interface, you think, well, what are we trying to do here? You might end up with a different kind of solution than you would otherwise. And instead of starting with this like, competitive audit where people look at what everybody's doing, you print out all the chat interfaces you see, you stick them up on a wall, right? And then you go from there. Even if you're not intentionally doing it, once you see that solution a lot, you kind of end up copying it. And in this case, starting with kind of understanding the problem, I mentioned some of the usability issues and things like that, and then letting that guide the solution. In this case, it got us more to an FAQ type of thing than a chatbot thing. And just starting to look at all the solutions out there might have landed much more in a kind of a different pattern. So now we have this expandable conversation interface, right? They have these little blocks that open and close. So that helps you find things easier. Here's an example of it actually answering the question, why do so many designs look the same? Uh, but There's a couple things missing in this screenshot because I've just simplified it for the purpose of this presentation, but I'll gradually start adding them back in just to explain what their role is in the UI. And so one important thing that's missing is this concept of suggested questions. So right after a response, every response gets a couple potential follow-on questions that are related to what you asked. So the way that this works is the first two are directly related to what you just asked. They look at the corpus and see other things that are relevant for that particular topic. And then in the next, I think two or three, look more broadly and kind of expand it so that you could go in other directions. And these are really critical because they address this issue that like a chat or open-ended kind of form field interface always has is what do I do here? Right? What should I ask? What can I ask? How do I know what the system's capable of? A blank input field doesn't really do a great job of giving you answers to that. And so things like these suggested questions actually go a really long way to keep you aware of what's possible and guide you to things that actually make sense as next steps. So we sort of knew from the start that these were important because of the, again, blank slate kind of problem. But we iterated a number of different ways on how to actually do this design for them. So early version, you can see that there's this little like light bulb icon in the ask a question bar on the bottom. And if you click that, it would give you like a whole mass of here's all the things you can ask about. Now, a little light bulb icon, totally unclear that that's what this is going to do, right? And also, this is sort of hidden. So we kind of tweaked it to have a what else can I ask button that would open this up. But in both cases, the burden was really on the person to say, I want these, as opposed to us putting them in context in ways that actually were useful. So then we began a series of explorations that just put them directly after each answer. So here's one, here's kind of another version. But this didn't require people to say, give me suggested questions. They just showed up and were trying to be as relevant as possible to the answers. But ultimately, instead of all these different visual styles, what we got to is just treat them as part of the response. So you get the answer, a very faint little line shows up, and there's just some light bullet points, and there they are. They're directly in line inside of that interface. And the question I asked here is actually pretty related to this. Like, what does it mean to divert the train? And effectively, if people are kind of in a either visual kind of scanning flow or they're in an interaction flow, and you want something to be there when they need it, it's best to like integrate it as much as possible. And I think this is a nice example of it, right? Instead of like different visual designs or anything like that, you just use the smallest amount of visual contrast possible to make them feel a little different, but still very much part of the core interface there. Uh, a while ago, I think at the beginning of this year, possibly, we went and ran some usability studies on the Ask Luke interface because we just had some extra cycles. And one of the things that happened over and over again is that the suggested questions were really not only a key part of helping set expectations, like what can you do in this UI, but also they helped really get people to a good experience because any suggested question would actually have an answer behind it, as opposed to other things that people could put in there, like, do you like ham? It's probably going to be like, sorry, I haven't written anything about liking ham. So that worked out pretty good. And speaking of getting people to the value of this whole interface, this is a common theme that I have over and over again, which is how can you make the product design reflect what the system is doing and thereby like what value you can get out of it? So suggested questions are one thing, but another thing is these citations. Because again, the way the system works, the way the Ask Luke system works, is you ask a question, it looks at the entire catalog of information that's in there, and it pulls together an answer that's as relevant as possible using that data. And so you can see here, we not only cite things on the right, but there's these little citations that show up inside of the field. There's like little gray number ones and twos in there. And in the same testing I mentioned a second ago, right? These citations were really a key part of getting people to understand how the system works, but also it helped to create a lot of trust because each of these little citations, you can go in here, hover over it, and have a sense of where that information came from. You can click on it, you can go deeper. And so it kind of kills two birds with one stone, right? Helps you understand how the system works, but also gives you this added layer of credibility because there's actually something behind the responses as opposed to they're just kind of being made up, if you will. Now, when you click on one of these things, I teased this at the beginning where I showed going into a video, but what happens is you see these citations on the right there. Those are the dark green blobs. And if you tap on any one of them, what you do is you get another card in the chat UI that effectively is that content. So you kind of click on it and it expands into a full view of that. And you can have a little bit of a mini experience that is tied to specifically either that document or that video or that audio file or what have you. So let me show you what that looks like. So here I said, how does free shipping help? And you can see on the right, there's this little card that says there's an article that has a lot of information on this. And if you were to click on that, now you have a new card that is that full article. And that full article has a summary generated by AI. It's got the key topics generated by AI. And then it also has a little chip on the bottom there where you can ask questions specifically scoped to that object, right? Whether it's a big video or an article or whatever. You can also X that out and just ask more broad questions, but you kind of get a what I like to call object specific experience. And those objects can be all kinds of different things, not just web pages. I showed the videos, there's podcasts in there, there's a bunch of images, PDFs, right? So all of these things make up the content that can be used to answer these questions. And at this stage, we're getting a little bit into the how does this work? Because the whole system, and I started the talk at the beginning talking about these AI models that we can put to work to kind of re-envision these systems, right? The way the whole thing works is we use AI models to break down all this content in a way that it can be reassembled. So let me do like a 3 or 4 semi-technical slides here just to give you a sense of what's happening. And then we'll kind of come back to why in a second. But let's take a video file, for example, right? So there's all these videos. They're from presentations like this one. And what we do is we take some of those models that I showed you earlier to run a bunch of tasks on this. So number one, we will take that audio and we'll turn it into text. And then we'll look at the different speakers and use a diarization model to annotate this speaker, that speaker. We'll take that whole transcript and summarize it. We'll pull out keywords. We'll generate some suggested questions that it can answer. And in this case, we're not using any face recognition or object detection, but we could. So we run a bunch of these processes, right, to basically turn that video into stuff that we can then reassemble. And there's one more step there, which is we need to clean that up. So for example, like we need to make sure every time it says Luke, it's talking about me, Luke. We add some metadata like the date or the title or something like that, stuff that maybe the models can't infer. And so all that gets kind of processed. And to unpack this one more second is you're not limited just by like what an off-the-shelf AI model can do. A lot of times these models will have more generalized characteristics and capabilities. And then you can do a couple extra steps to make them specific to your use case. Right? So if you have something that can sort of like parse images, for example, we use that to create something that would pick a keyframe out of these videos because there's hundreds of videos here. And when we show them in the interface, we want to pick a cool keyframe, right? So in the past, you could do that manually, right? You could feed that video file to a computer and then show a human, here's a bunch of different potential keyframes, and the person would click, yes, use this one, yes, use that one. I didn't feel like doing that several hundred times. So what I did instead is I just created a couple examples that I could use to fine tune an AI model. So we do what I said, which is create a bunch of random thumbnails off a video. And then I would, of all these, I'd say this is the one I want. Right? So I'd kind of tell the model that. And then we do that for a couple other examples, like this one. Right? And of these, what's the best one? Maybe it's this one. So you do that for a couple examples. And then after that, the machines take over. Right? So if you can think about how to model a behavior, you can pretty easily these days just train a machine to do it. Right? And I like this example. So, it's not the full model, it's just this top kind of layer that we fine tune on. I like this example because you can really think about having AI models do a lot of things for you. And it's not really the, first reaction of people. The first reaction is, oh, I'm going to have to go through and pick these thumbnails versus, oh, I'm just going to get a machine, tell it what good looks like, and then it'll know what good looks like because it learned, hence machine learning. Um, okay, back up to other types of files. So we have video files, we have audio files. Just go through a couple examples here just to show you the pattern. If you have something like a podcast, again, we can run speech to text, we can diarize, so we know who's talking, we can summarize, do all these kinds of good things. And then once we have that done, again, we'll stick some metadata on it, like date, location, type. Again, we'll make sure that the proper nouns align and all that good stuff. Do the same thing for articles, but now you can see that there's not this text, speech to text kind of step, because instead we just need to summarize, pull keywords. We still have to do the same cleanup. So anyway, all these different kinds of objects, we use AI models to run a bunch of tasks on them that basically make them good for retrieval and recombination. So let's look at that for a second. Now you take all these different bits of content, right, that we've cleaned up, we've put into like similar kinds of sizes, and what we do is we actually stick them into a embedding index. And what this does is it creates sort of like a fuzzy database of all of that information. And when I say fuzzy database, it means that things that are kind of like about touch on mobile-ish become related, or things that are sort of about e-commerce forms kind of end up being characterized in a similar way. And we can use this index to find things that way, right? So we can find things on a more like semantic, fuzzy level than, for example, something like keyword search, where I would have to have the word, e-commerce or similar pairs to it. I'm instead looking for things conceptually here, which is, again, kind of a different way of recombining information. And we're using AI models to put things in this index, and we're also using AI models to take things out of this index. In this case, it's embedding and retrieval type of things. So I'll show a little system diagram, and then we'll get out of the technical bits. But I think this is worth looking at because this is generally the structure of a lot of these kind of AI applications or AI systems, if you will. And it also highlights just some of the core concepts with machine learning, right? So a big part of any kind of AI system is you need data and you need to make that data clean. So I showed you a whole bunch of different ways of doing that, right? And then once you have the data that you're going to work from and you've done your best to make it as high quality as possible, then you go and put it into whatever kind of system you're using. In this case, I want to search against this data and I want to retrieve from it, right? So we're going to put in this embedding index. And again, here we don't just have like one way of searching here. There's a lot of different retrievers out there, and you can have a bunch of them, and you can run a number of them against that index to get a bunch of different results, as I'll show in a second. And then you can rank those results using yet another AI model. So this is another theme you keep hearing me say, there's an AI model here and there's an AI model there, right? Um, when we have these technology platform shifts, like many, many parts of the tech stack end up changing. It's not just like the very, very end where we assemble an answer like in ChatGPT, right? It's all the way down. We use it for cleaning, we use it for embedding, we use it for retrieving, we use it for ranking. We just have different models doing different things in different parts of this pipeline. So anyway, these results come back, right? We found all the relevant things. And then we take all those results and we go again to an AI model. We say, hey, assemble a coherent response. This is where most people are familiar with AI stuff. So they have like a prompt, right? Using this information, answer in this kind of way. But again, we can do that multiple times using different models, and then we can rank and get a better answer. And if you do that, you can create this really nice feedback loop, which is again a very core part of any AI system, which is you want to get better. So you want to make that retrieval system and that ranking system better. So you want to kind of collect as much insights on what good looks like so you can make the whole thing better. So as a little example of that, let's say I wanted to kind of make some of these retrievers better. Very similar to the way I showed you that we can just fine tune a little bit a model that picks images, right? Picking those keyword or those keyframes in my videos. I can basically train my own little retriever here. And the way I do that is I take some sample questions people ask and then the results. And then I basically tell it what good looks like using some of that feedback that I was just talking about. And then it'll create a way to re-rank and embed it differently afterwards. And this kind of just shows some of the results in a little bit of a technical way. But if you use an off-the-shelf solution from OpenAI for something like this, versus in this case, we train that little cross encoder, you can see you don't have to worry about what the base score number actually means. You just have to see, oh, looks a lot better, right? And the reason why it's a lot better is because a lot of the stuff that's out there is just trained on like lots of very general sets of sentences. So they're kind of going to just be okay at lots and lots of stuff, as opposed to being really, really good at one specific thing. So if you custom train, in this case, we custom train this little encoder that puts things into this embedding index, you can actually beat something like OpenAI's embedding model by a significant amount. So blah, 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 technical diagrams, what does this all mean? Here's a tangible experience. Before, if you went to Ask Luke and you said something like Larry Teller, no modes, it would come back and say, I have no idea what the hell you're talking about. Sorry, I haven't written about that. But with this new retriever that is trained specifically for the information in Ask Luke, it will say, oh, I think you're talking about Larry Tesler. Me and Larry Tesler worked at Yahoo together. He was famous for no modes and right. The information was there. We just needed to fix the models that find it. And when I say fix, I mean just, get better at the specific tasks that we're using them for. Because again, they're generally trained on these very general, broad tasks that have to work on everything, which makes them good, but not great at our specific tasks. So, document cleanup, processing, embedding, re-ranking, right? Lots of work. And a common question I get is like, why would you do all that versus just using something like ChatGPT? Well, if you go to something like ChatGPT and you ask a question, like I showed earlier, why do so many designs look the same? It's actually very much the same answer as the retriever we talked about a second ago. You're going to get this very broad response, which generally pulls a bunch of world knowledge, and it has the entire internet in there. So it's going to answer from the entire internet, right? Versus if you ask on Ask Luke, it doesn't use the entire internet. It uses the entirety of the internet to know how to answer a question, but it answers from my specific content corpus, right? So instead, on the right, if you ask me, I'll say, well, most designs look the same because people are out there just copying what they see, which is very different than, legal and regulatory constraints or, cultural influences or all these like very genericified almost answers, if you will. So A, you get this very opinionated and focused kind of particular point, which if you think about individuals or corporations or anything like that, right? Like everybody has their perspective on something that you want to reflect. And then you also get the citation stuff that I was talking about, the ability to go deep into these experiences. And so a lot using this stuff on your side, right? Like kind of building the software on your end allows you to control the experience a heck of a lot more versus you just get what ChatGPT launches. So let me show a couple of those. So I mentioned we've got these, video, audio, web pages, PDFs, these kinds of things, and I sort of showed some of these things. But in the context of Ask Luke, when you're on a video, you not only get the inline player there, you get the transcript below, but you can actually go and search through that whole transcript, find that piece, and it will take you specifically to that part of the video when you just click on it. You can ask questions just of that video. So it allows us to use all these AI capabilities, but really create and design a different experience. If you go to an audio file, you can see some similar stuff, but some things particular to audio, right? So there's a little audio player of the kinds of controls we want. There's kind of indication who's talking when. In a article, right? Again, you can kind of read that whole article inline, which you can't really in something like a chat GPT will just, even if it cites something, you click on it, it'll go fire you off to that website as opposed to really integrating it inside the experience. For PDFs, we can put in a PDF viewer. So uh, you get the idea, right? Like the UI you can shape to what you want, which is in many cases pretty important for the type of product that you're building. Now, I'm showing PDFs here, and there's like one or two more little kind of behind the curtain things that I want to show you that I think give you a good sense of how to work with these systems and the types of things to think about as somebody that's trying to craft a user experience or a product by using, the clay of AI, if you will. So I've got a PDF up here. And you'd think, PDF is kind of the same sort of thing as maybe an article or maybe some sort of images. But I'll show you sort of the impact of what happened when we added close to 400 PDFs to that searchable index I showed you earlier. So when I built Ask Luke over 2 years ago, first I just started with the articles. And so back then, if you asked the question like, what is design? You can see it would cite three little articles on the right there. And the answer I thought was pretty good, right? It's the process of gradually applying constraints and iterating through possible solutions. So it was pretty nice. I was kind of happy with this response. And then we added all these PDFs to it. And I went through and just was testing what it looked like. And I asked the same question, what is design? And now you can see that the answer is something like design is the fundamental soul of human creation. I'm like, wait, what? The heck is that? Doesn't sound like anything I would say. Fundamental soul of human creation. And it turned out what happened was when we drop these PDFs in, PDFs are full of a bunch of like layout material. So when we went through all that processing, they actually ended up like being really big, influential chunks of information on the response. And you can sort of see what happens when you just like parse out the content of a PDF. And it turns out that one PDF there had a bunch of quotes from other people on what design is. There's like 3 or 4 slides from this presentation that showed other people's answers. And so each thing became like a lot of information that literally just had one quote. And so those quotes ended up really skewing the results. And this is, again, illustration of kind of garbage in, garbage out, if you will. So what we ended up having to do is actually really spend extra time cleaning up the PDFs, removing all this markup stuff, formatting it differently, and basically just getting rid of a lot of the junk that was clogging up our answers. So when we removed that, and then we actually added some rebalancing to try and look at other different forms of media. So we don't just only come up with a PDF. We also try and get, in this case, you can see a video file is there, audio file, an article. And so there's a bit more diversity in responses. And you can see overall, the answer actually got a heck of a lot better. So just shows you some of the kind of evaluation and tweaking that you have. It's not just shove all this stuff in an embedding index and walk away. You might have some unintended consequences of that if you take that approach. And all the stuff keeps moving forward, right? So we've actually been able to do a lot better with PDFs over time. This is an example of a chart from one of those PDFs from a talk I gave talking about the impact of A/B testing. And when we did all the cleanup of these PDFs that I described earlier, you can see up on the right, that's kind of what we got to. It did a really nice job extracting the text and, putting all the things in there, but it's not really that information rich, right? It's hard to see how that would actually come back and influence a response in a positive way. But what we did was we looked at vision models, which got an awful lot better at kind of creating semantic understanding of an image. And again, using AI as clay, right? We were able to plug in this additional model here, which now takes that picture and you can see it writes like a very useful description of this screen. The chart illustrates the impact of A/B testing results over time. Wow, that's so much better than when we had at the top, right? And it explains what the green line and the gray line and the call outs and all of that. So now we have that content as part of the corpus and we can answer questions with it. Here's another example. This is a picture from a slide on the left. And up at the top was when we just did text extraction, a lot of work to make that clean and nice, as you can see, but not nearly as useful as the kind of description you get out from this vision model, right? Where it'll actually spend time understanding what does this image mean and write a clear description and information set about it. So again, same theme around putting good quality content in and using the latest and greatest capabilities of AI models to create that good, clean content gets you a lot of value on the design side. So now if you ask a question like, what is design? You can see the results change again. But it's this constant process of adjustment and improvement. And especially given how much AI models and their capabilities are changing, right? You can kind of keep improving things and making them better and better and getting the product more to the place you want. Okay, another thing that's kind of interesting, I think, is because these vision models got so good at, in this case, we were pushing them on the PDF side, we actually were able to take all those 2,000 images on my site and run the same process through them, giving kind of creating these rich descriptions of them. But doing so means that now we can return them as part of the answers to questions. So as you can see here, I asked this question, what is the difference between AR and VR? And before that would just be a wall of text. But now it actually found this image that illustrates that in a really compelling way and references it in the text. So it says this image shows that spectrum. You can see that VR creates a digital world where AR adds digital information to the real world. And there's a picture of it below. Pretty cool improvement when you consider most of the time, you're getting kind of just flat walls of text with these systems. And back to the user testing we did one last time here, a thing that came up all the time was people were sort of intimidated by just lots and lots of text. They really wanted to understand things more through visuals. And full transparency, there's still more to do here. Like the images don't come back as often as I would like. So soon we'll launch a bit of a project that tweaks this a bit more and does a better job pulling from images that exist in there and interweaving it inside of the responses in a way that I think is more helpful for addressing this issue. But again, a nice example of how you can kind of keep going at this and making it better and better. And another kind of idea slash project is actually putting videos in line rather than making you click, we'd put the video in there and position it right to the point in the video that actually has relevant information for your text question. Sorry for your question. Okay, that's a lot of stuff. Sorry, but again, I was hoping just to show you like how you can, use this to your advantage, right? So the big picture is there's this website. It's got all this stuff, thousands of articles, hundreds of PDFs, thousands of images. And when we talk about how does AI eat my website, right? This is a system that eats up all this content, all 29 years of it, and then reforms it in new ways. And the way it does that is there's all of these different AI models out there that do different things, whether they convert speech to text or whether they help you kind of translate stuff or do information retrieval or detect objects, what have you. There's all these different AI models that we can put to work. Hence all of my little AI guys I showed you at the beginning, right? They're in the background there hustling to make all this stuff happen using all the AIs that they can to build out this experience. And I would like to think that the end result is not some kind of scary AI thing, right? It's not this giant super brain that's just slurping up everything and doing bad things. But instead, it's a new way to use the 30 years of content I've published, right? And that doesn't just reflect in terms of giving the AI access to it. It also means we can create a totally different kind of experience. We can put different kinds of content to work in different ways. And so we should ask this designer-made AI what designers should do about AI. So here's a little question. What should designers do about AI? And I think overall, strive to humanize technology and use these emerging technologies, make them more comfortable and understandable for people. All that stuff sounds really good to me. Um, and if you want to play with this yourself, we, on behalf of me and all my little AI guys here, there they are. You can just go to ask.lukew.com and you can poke at this yourself. Yeah, thanks. Hopefully helpful.